Welcome to Watch Symposium. I'm Austin, and this is a paid video for Vincent. He writes, "Hello, Austin. I'm a big fan of your reviews and want to ask your advice related to watches. I want to buy my first luxury watch for day-to-day usage. I plan to create a 3-watch collection with a Speedmaster and a JLC, so this first piece is critical for me. I would say that it would be my primary watch." All right, so Vincent's looking to buy his first luxury watch, and he's already thought about his ideal collection. He's already planned it out, and that's a really good idea. I made a video about that. I'll put a link in the description if I can find it. But, you know, oftentimes we start collecting watches and we buy watches that strike our fancy. All of a sudden, we've got a motley collection without any direction or focus or cohesion, and we don't even know when we're done. And you might never be done, but it's a good idea early on to think, okay, what would make me satisfied? Again, you might never achieve satisfaction, but it's a good idea to say, okay, what would be a goal to where I could step away and just say, I got what I want, I'm done, right? And for me, it was this watch. It was the no date sub, the Explorer 2, GMT Master 2, and a Datejust. And it changed along the way, and I thought, I don't really want a Datejust. And so, it will change, but having that focus is a good idea. So I think it's good that he's doing that. And the Speedmaster is going to give him the chronograph function. The JLC is going to be a great dress watch. So this whole video is talking about that daily wear that he's going to be adding first. I almost bought a Tudor North flag some time ago. I lost a great deal due to the stupidity of my colleagues. Okay, I guess he's talking about business-related things that maybe hindered the purchase of this watch. I'm not really sure. The problem is I never saw or tried this watch in real life. First, due to the shortage of those models in the ADs, and now due to COVID. Well, gray markets are always a great place to try on watches. I mean, if you, again, not every country or city has the kind of gray markets that Japan does, but you head to Nakano and you can try any kind of watch. And I think it's a really good idea to try a watch on, especially if it's something, if it's unlike anything else. I bought this watch totally, pretty much sight unseen, and the only thing I knew about it, it was 40 millimeters, and the watch I had been wearing, which was an Orient Blue Mako, was 40 millimeters as well. And so, yeah, it worked out for me, but he might not be getting that. All right, so now I'm looking at buying it on Chrono24 for around 3,500 USD, and I started wondering if the North flag is worth it. My dilemma is there's another watch that can be a better option, a Rolex Air King, the 116900. I like the size and style, the Explorer-like style of both watches. Even the colors are great for me. And then he talks about some things he likes about the Tudor North flag. Tudor has better numbers and better lume and looks like a more instrumental watch, and I think he means like a more tool watch aesthetic, which I don't know if I agree with that, but it's an opinion thing, which I admire more. I like the integrated bracelet and case. The price is half of what is asked for the Rolex Air King. All right, okay, so the lume is a very small factor. I wouldn't let that sway my decision because the lume on the Air King is going to be fine, I'm sure. When you're talking these $50, $100, $200 Seikos, you can buy the watch for the lume, but yeah, it's a very small factor. And he says he likes the integrated bracelet and case. That's something that I wouldn't be a fan of. Less versatility. If something ever happens to that bracelet, then you can't just put your own NATO strap on it. You've got to go back to RSC and have them rectify that. So you're kind of married to that strap it comes with. I don't think that's a good thing. And he talks about the price being half of what it is with Rolex Air King, and we're going to talk about that later because I think that's pretty much the whole point of this video. All right, he talks about some things he doesn't like. I do not like the power indicator and date window. All right, so the power indicator is interesting. I mean, if it's a daily wear, it's going to be a complication that's pretty meaningless. I mean, I wear this every day, so I don't need to see that it's topped off. I know it is. You know, the other day I went to the gym, I put on a Casio. This was, you know, sitting on my desk for a couple of hours. And so it would have been kind of interesting to come back and see where the power indicator was. I would have been curious to see. When you're winding the watch, watching that power indicator power up is kind of interesting. But if you like minimalist dials, then the power indicator can be kind of an eyesore, and it's really not that useful, again, if it's a daily wear. And when it comes to the power indicator on the North Flag, it's pretty obtrusive. It's got that yellow accent along with the minute hand. I'm sorry, the second hand. You know, again, it's kind of cool, but it's a trade-off in terms of aesthetics. And so is the date. I love knowing what day it is, but it comes at a price. The balance on the dial, the aesthetics. And, you know, when it comes to something like this, or the Milgausses, or the Explorers, or the OPs, I think it's a sacrifice worth making to get that balance and that really beautiful aesthetic. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of a lame little date window, but again, you know, it'll provide that little bit of information that can be kind of nice when you're in town and you want to know what day it is. I would say the Tudor Ranger has a better looking dial. Okay. Actually, if Tudor would look like ID Guy suggested, I wouldn't have this dilemma. All right, link in the description to ID Guy's video. I checked it out. Fantastic video. And he actually sort of, at the end of the video, redesigns the Tudor North Flag, and he does a great job. It looks awesome. I mean, just watch the video. He has one with a 24-hour hand, which you'd have to put, you'd have to put more markings on the dial to make it usable. So I'm not crazy about that one, but the one where he repositions the power indicator, he gives a frame to the date window frame, a yellow frame, and he puts known as a 9 at the 9 indices. Looks great, and you look at that and you look back at the real North Flag, and you can see it kind of ruined the North Flag to me, to be honest. Not that I even ever really liked the North Flag, but yeah, it kind of makes the North Flag in its current form sort of embarrassing. Check that video out. Okay, here he's talking about the Air King. He says it looks controversial, but it works for me. I think he's talking about the busyness of the dial and the green accents, and a lot of people love it, and a lot of people aren't so crazy about it. For a daily wear, it doesn't really do it for me. I think if you have a vast collection, it would make kind of an interesting piece. It's the only Rolex watch with the bicolored logo, the yellow coronet and the Rolex in green. Yeah, all right, but yeah, it is, I think it's kind of a polarizing watch, to be honest. This aviation style dial is very familiar to me. I have a pilot watch with the nav bead dial, and apparently the dial on the Air King is made to look like an instrument dial on, I want to say, an aircraft of some sort. Anyway, that's what they're going for. I like the display and color accents, and the fact that I can use it with custom straps and NATO leather straps. Absolutely, versatility is fun. I mean, this is your daily wear, and it's fun fiddling with your watch. So that's definitely a plus. I'm not so big a fan of the gold numbers with the lack of lume. And he's talking about on the Air King, the 3, 6, and 9 indices, which are made from white gold. There's no lume in those indices. And I want you guys to think for a second about the Explorer 214270. And it came out in 2010 with what's come to be known as the Mark I dial. And the Mark I dial had the 3, 6, and 9 indices in white gold, okay? And it changed 6 years later in 2016. They came out with what's known as the Mark II 214270. And a couple of things changed. The hands changed a bit. The minute hand was a little longer. The hour hand was a little bit beefier. But the main difference was that 3, 6, and 9. It was no longer solid white gold with no lume. It had lume, all right? And I made a video about what Rolex is doing and how they're trying to differentiate their models. I'll put a link in the description to that video, but I think you can see that here as well, because the same year the Mark II Explorer came out, what else came out? The Air King that we're talking about, the 116900. And it had those 3, 6, 9 indices in solid white gold. So they used those on the Air King, and they stopped using them on the Explorer. Did they stop using them on the Explorer because the Air King was coming? Was it a way to differentiate those models? Because the indices were pretty much the same. I mean, if you look at the Mark I dials of the Explorer and the Air King, you can see that those solid gold indices at the 369 are identical. So I think that's kind of interesting. So why did the Mark I go to the Mark II dial when you're talking about the Explorer? Well, it could have been because the AK was on the horizon, all right? He also mentions, talking about the AK, the Air King, the price. It's twice as expensive as the Tudor. That's the second time he's brought that up, all right? Again, we'll focus on that. Some context. I'm 36 years old with a family, 6'6" tall, I guess 6 feet 6 inches tall, with a 7 3/4 inch wrist. This watch, the Rolex or Tudor, will be my day-to-day watch. I prefer the JLC, which he's yet to get, as my dress business watch. So none of those would be worn during business meetings. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's a factor, you know. It drives me crazy. People say nobody notices your watch, and for the most part, you're right, nobody notices your watch, but the ones that do, you got to be careful about, all right? They might be trying to read you, and if your boss, who's a particularly jealous and envious guy, sees that you have a Rolex, it might not work out for you when it comes time to move up the corporate ladder. He might think that you're a little bit above your station. You got a better watch than he does. You know, if you're talking a two-tone blingy Datejust, that's another thing, or a bluesy, my God, I mean, you know, your career might be done. I'm kind of joking here, and it shouldn't be a factor, but it is. And so there are certain jobs where you might want to fly under the radar, and a Rolex isn't going to do that. But, you know, to be fair, you're not talking about a bluesy, you're not talking about a really eye-catching two-tone watch. It's a pretty humble watch as far as a Rolex goes, but there are more humble options like the OP, or I wouldn't say anything with a date magnifier that screams Rolex, or an Explorer, all right? So anyway, just a factor, and so I'm glad he mentioned that, because there are certain situations where you don't want to project such an expensive watch. And let's talk a little bit, before we kind of get to his question, about Tudor, because he's 36, and look, they're not going to check your ID at the Tudor AD, all right? But Tudor has changed, all right? It used to be a cheaper option, a more affordable option. It gave you that Rolex technology in the case, but without the Rolex movement. And so militaries used it. You know, it was a great way to get that waterproof watch that pretty much did everything that a Rolex would do back in the day, you know, back in the day when these were, you know, really functional tool watches that could withstand water. You know, back in 1956, wearing a watch to the beach, I mean, it's just probably not something you did. And And so how could you get a good watch without paying an arm and a leg? Well, you might go Tudor, and you'd get that case, and you'd get the Rolex case. You get everything, but it just would have the ETA movement, which is not that big of a deal, right? And so that's what Tudor was. And that's, I think, sort of the heyday and the pinnacle of Tudor. And throughout the decades following, the 1950s, which is, I think, the heyday for both brands, it's changed, and it's had some ups and downs design-wise, and I'm talking about Tudor here. It really went off the mark in the 90s, and the Aeronaut and the Iconaut and the Hydronaut 2. Hydronaut 1, still beautiful, all right? That's like an opinion thing, but they were trying to differentiate themselves. They were design-wise, having a bit more fun, okay? Fast forward 2 decades to today, and they're watches for young people, okay? They're not as expensive. They're good watches. They're quality watches, but, you walk into a Tudor AD, and, the colors and the vibe and the design of the shop and the design of the website, it's for a younger, just starting out in horology and mechanical watches kind of guy market. Look, they've sponsored David Beckham and Lady Gaga. That's all you got to know right there. All right, so they're going for a younger customer, and Tudor really has changed. And the Tudor, the Tudor subs of the 1950s, and that's done, it's gone. That brand has just changed, and Rolex has too. Okay, but Tudor really has, and it hasn't changed in a way that a middle-aged guy might embrace. I got to be honest. I love some of the Tudor designs, and they seem to have their foot on the path of the tool watch, and I really respect that and really like it, but their marketing for the younger crowd loses me, and I don't want to be part of that. I don't want to say I'm too old for it, but I'm too mature for it. I'm past that. You're 36. I think you might too be past it. You're thinking Rolex. Leave it to the younger guys in their 20s. They've just gotten a good job. Maybe they can't quite swing the $10,000 Rolex, but, a pre-owned 2000 USD Pelagos or Black Bay, it's a great watch for them at that age until they're ready to really pay that money for a Rolex, all right? But anyway, that's just sort of what I wanted to talk about right there in regards to your age. I think you're at the age and the maturity level, and you're talking about Rolexes here. You know which brand you should be focusing on. If you were a decade younger or less, I would be saying something different, okay? But again, I'm sure that Tudor would probably disagree with what I said and say, hey, we're making watches for everybody. David Beckham's no spring chicken, let me tell you. All right, but look, all right, let me know what you think about it. That might be controversial, what I'm saying, but yeah. Anyway, let's talk about the last question. All right, and this is the big one. Which watch would you recommend to buy? Is the Rolex Air King twice as good as a Tudor North Flag? And is it twice as good? Is it worth twice the price? I think he's considering the cost, the way he frames that question. And it's a very subjective question, but let's just step back and think about it. We're talking about watches that cost thousands of dollars. If you're looking at it purely with your head, then either of these watches probably doesn't make a lick of sense. For $200, you can get a Casio that resets itself every night via radio waves. It's dead on accurate, and it charges itself every day with solar power, okay? You will be able to wear that watch pretty much for the rest of your life, no problem, okay? And it's got a bunch of functions, and it's arguably more comfortable. But look at these with our head. And look, I say that you could wear it the rest of your life. In theory, you could, but the Casios are throwaway items, and these are watches that last, and these are, watches, they're just a completely different animal, okay? And we don't buy them because they're rational, okay? We don't buy them with our head, all right? We use the head as we make our decisions, but a lot of the desire for these watches comes from the heart, okay? And that's not to discount the functionality of these watches in terms of timekeeping. I mean, when it comes to mechanical watches and mechanical technology, these watches are the best in the world by far. Obviously, the Rolex is going to be degrees better than the Tudor, just, that's no surprise. It's going to have, it's the height of technology when it comes to mechanical watchmaking. So I don't want to discount how functional these watches are. And that's a big aspect, because your heart can lead you to $200 Seikos and $50 Vostoks, but your head can say, functionally, these are just pains in the ass. Can't really deal with it. So there's a balance here. But what I see in this question, Vincent, is you're trying to serve two masters. You're trying to think with your head, but you're trying to satisfy your heart. And you can't serve two masters, all right? Because you're trying to get a watch that appeals to your heart, but that makes sense, okay? And look, if you're talking, if you're talking the wife of a watch enthusiast, she's going to say go for the Tudor, all right? Because, you like it, but it's not that expensive, okay? It's balancing out what the head wants and what the heart wants. But you're not your wife, and you have to listen to your heart here, okay? Because to me, it's clear that your heart is making you gravitate towards the Rolex, but your just head can't wrap around the fact that it's twice as much, okay? But is it twice the watch? And again, it's a subjective answer, but for me, it's a resounding yes. Look, you're going to pay $3,500 for a Tudor, but is it going to make you feel the same way as the Rolex? It wouldn't me. It wouldn't me. My Tudor Hydronauts, I like them, but they don't make me feel anywhere near as good as when I'm wearing something like this. They don't appeal to the heart in the same way, all right? And I don't want to discount Tudors, because there's a great place for these in a collection. If you work a job where you don't want to project that Rolex cost, or if you live in Amsterdam or London and it's dangerous, going Tudor probably would make a lot more sense. But for you, discounting those sort of external factors, you, I think, want the Rolex. And you got to listen to your heart, because once you get this watch, it's going to last you, well, for years and years. And you're going to forget about the money, and the money's not going to mean anything. And, 10 years from now, you forget about that kind of thing, but you don't forget about the fact that you're wearing a Rolex instead of a Tudor, okay? You're getting to be almost 40. It's Rolex time, okay? That's a watch that's going to hold its value more. I know it's very convincing to look at the Tudor and to look at its progression and its link to Tudor's past. And if you love Tudors, it's a no-brainer. Go that route. But if you are leaning towards the Rolex, like I think you are, I think you owe it to yourself to make that daily wear one that knocks your socks off. And Tudors are great. They're practical in certain circumstances, but they just don't knock my socks off. They don't knock anybody's socks off, I think. I mean, aside from real Tudor aficionados, and I'm sure they exist. The Rolex is going to satisfy you more in the long term. It's going to blow your mind every time you look down and you see the crown and the Rolex logo. It does with me. It never stops, okay? The only time it stops is if you stop appreciating it. Okay, you start taking that watch for granted. Okay, that's your deal. But if you appreciate what you have, and these watches are lifetime achievements, every time I look down and I see that crown and that Rolex, it gives me a buzz. It knocks my socks off, okay? And so you want a watch that does that. Is that worth the cost? Yes, okay? Now, are the two objects side by side, discounting all of this X factor? A lot of people would say, you know, the Air King makes no sense. Those people are not thinking about it with their heart. They're thinking about it with their head. They're not the enthusiasts, okay? They're just not us, okay? They're not us. Pay the money. Enjoy your Rolex. It's going to keep its value for a long time. It's going to knock your socks off every time you look down and appreciate it. And, you know, Tudor, if you were a decade younger, I'd say go for the Tudor. Is it going to be a stretch to get the Rolex? Absolutely. Is it worth it? Totally worth it. Totally worth it. Without a doubt, my recommendation would be go Rolex. It's worth that X factor. And you know what? If it's not, sell the Air King. You'll probably make a buck, and then you can get Tudors, all right? So definitely go for the Air King. So before I end the video, I just want to talk about some other options, because you like no-date watches. You're looking for the daily wear. Would I use the Air King as a daily wear? I might not. You know, I have a friend that went through, geez, like 3 or 4 Air Kings. He kept buying it, selling it, buying it, and selling it because, well, he loved the watch, but there was something about it he didn't like. And finally he put 2 and 2 together about what he didn't like about it. And it wasn't the aesthetics. He loved that. It was the fact that it was too heavy, all right? Which you wouldn't think about it, but it's got the 31-31 movement, and that's the same movement as the Milgauss. It's a very anti-magnetic. It's got the Faraday cage, I want to say, and it gives it a weight that might be uncomfortable. So I would definitely try it on first if you haven't, because that could be a factor. I mean, he loved the watch other than the weight, and that drove him to sell it multiple times and eventually just throw in the towel with it and get rid of it and use on to a different Rolex model. But aesthetically, and that's really what I want to focus on here, I think there are more watches that are more conducive to wearing every day. And I think the Milgauss is kind of funky, but I think the dial is not quite as busy. Again, it's got some funk to it with the accents and, you know, the discontinued white dial without the green glass. Very interesting, worth thinking about. And it's almost like, you know, just an aesthetically different Air King, all right? And I think while it's a little bit more funky color-wise, the dial layout's a little bit more minimalist and a little bit more traditional. And it's got that cool second hand. So that's something I would think about. I'd also think about just an Explorer, 39mm Explorer. And, you know, you love that Explorer aesthetic. Hey, what about the Explorer? That's going to be a great daily wear. It goes with everything. A suit, you could wear that to the office. And, you know, the lack of the accents when you're wearing it day in and day out, month in and month out, are actually something you really appreciate, and something that might start to grate on you when it comes to the Air King. And we can't forget the Oyster Perpetual line, all right? So the discontinued 114300, the 39mm white dial would be really cool to pick up, or a black dial, or a new one, the 124300. Okay, that's the 41mm, or the 36mm, the 126000. You've got some really off-the-wall colors, but they've got some conservative colors that I really like as well. Silver, black, and bright blue, which is my favorite. I don't like the name bright blue because you always think of the light blue, and I'm not talking about the light blue, I'm talking about the navy blue. And I think those are watches that probably would work better. They're watches that I would want to wear more than an Air King, okay? But again, these are just some no-date watches with similar aesthetics that I thought I'd throw out. And hey, you know, the Air King is one of those watches, if you get it and you think, you know, these green accents are driving me nuts, and so is this busy dial, you can sell it. You're not going to lose hardly any money, if any, and then you can pick up an OP or whatever you decide and explore whatever. So it's a safe option to try it. That's my recommendation. Viewers, what do you think? Was this good advice? What do you think Vincent should do? For me, it's a no-brainer. Go Air King. Go Air King. Thanks, Vincent, for your question. If you want a question, check out the description of this video. I'll make one for you. Thanks for watching. See you next time.